I'll give you 100K if you fix this. They laughed at her for being a woman and a tech, until the computer turned on. Jennifer Miller felt her heart race as laughter echoed through the conference room. The director had just tossed the computer onto the table like it was nothing, and looked at her with utter disdain. "I'll give you $100,000 if you can fix this in 48 hours, said Richard Thompson, adjusting his expensive suit. But honestly, I doubt a woman really understands technology. The executives around the table burst into laughter as if it were the funniest joke in the world. Jennifer swallowed the humiliation dryly, keeping her posture straight, even as her cheeks burned with shame. At 28, she was the only IT technician at the financial consulting firm Thompson & Associates, located in the financial district of New York City. "Mr. Richard," Jennifer began, keeping her voice steady, "I was called here to perform routine system maintenance. I didn't know there was a bet involved." "It's not a bet, my dear." Richard slammed the table. "It's a real challenge. This computer contains essential files to close the biggest contract in this company's history. The deadline is exactly 2 days away, and none of the technicians I hired could fix it. If you succeed, you get 100 grand. If you don't, at least we prove we should have hired my brother-in-law's firm from the start." Jennifer looked at the device on the table. It was a corporate desktop, seemingly in good condition, but something about the way Richard spoke made her suspicious. Why would a man who clearly underestimated her make such a generous offer? "Do you accept or not?" Richard crossed his arms. "Because I have other technicians waiting outside, men with real experience." The words cut like a razor, but Jennifer took a deep breath. She had grown up being the only girl interested in computers at school, graduated with a degree in computer science in a male-dominated class, and every day had to prove she deserved to be there. "I accept," she said, lifting her chin. "Excellent." Richard clapped theatrically. "Michael, call Margaret to witness this agreement. I want everything documented." Margaret Wilson entered the room carrying a notepad. She had been the secretary for over 15 years, a 62-year-old woman with graying hair tied in an elegant bun. Jennifer had always gotten along well with her, as Margaret was one of the few people in the company who treated her with respect. "Margaret, write this down," Richard dictated. "Jennifer Miller accepts the challenge of fixing the computer in 48 hours. If she succeeds, she gets $100,000. If she fails, she publicly admits that women lack the technical competence for this kind of work." Jennifer felt her blood run cold. He had added a humiliating clause that wasn't in the original offer. But before she could protest, Richard continued, "Oh, and one more thing. During these 48 hours, you'll work alone. No outside help, no consulting, no access to the company's other equipment. Just your own tools." "That's not fair," Jennifer protested. "Any technician needs proper resources to work." "Life isn't fair, sweetheart," Richard smirked cynically. "Especially for those who want to play at men's professions. Do you accept the terms or back out now?" Jennifer looked around the room. The 5 executives watched her as if she were an animal in a zoo. Margaret gave her a discreet look of encouragement. At the back of the room, Andrew Clark, Richard's assistant, nervously shuffled papers without making eye contact. "I accept all the conditions," Jennifer declared. "Perfect." Richard slapped the table. "The clock starts now. It's exactly 2:32 p.m. this Tuesday. You have until 2:32 p.m. on Thursday." Not a minute more, Jennifer approached the computer and began examining it externally. It was a high-performance device, primarily used for complex financial analyses. There were no obvious signs of physical damage, but when she tried to turn it on, nothing happened. "Can I take the equipment to my office?" she asked. "No," Richard was firm. "You'll work here, in the meeting room where everyone can see. Total transparency." Jennifer felt this was turning into a public spectacle, but she had no choice. She grabbed her toolkit and got to work right there, under the curious gazes and some snide remarks from the men present. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now back to the story. After 2 hours of initial work, Jennifer made a disturbing discovery. When she removed the side panel of the device, she found clear signs of sabotage. Someone had deliberately poured a corrosive substance onto specific components of the motherboard, causing damage that prevented the system from functioning. "Mr. Richard," she called, interrupting a conversation he was having with other executives. "I need to report something important." "What now, giving up already?" This equipment was sabotaged. Someone intentionally damaged the internal components. Richard feigned surprise, but Jennifer noticed a strange glint in his eyes. "Sabotage? That's ridiculous. This computer was working perfectly fine until last week. Must be your imagination." "Sir, I've worked with this for over 7 years. I recognize signs of sabotage when I see them. This substance was applied with surgical precision to cause exactly this kind of failure." "Even if that were true, the challenge stands." Richard crossed his arms. "You agreed to fix the equipment, no matter the problem." Jennifer realized she'd walked into a trap. Richard knew exactly what was wrong with the computer, because he had orchestrated the sabotage himself. But why? What did he gain from humiliating her publicly? For the rest of the afternoon, Jennifer worked in silence, trying to repair the damaged components. It was delicate work, requiring precision soldering and replacing specific parts. Fortunately, she always carried spare parts in her toolkit, a precaution she'd learned after years of handling damaged equipment. At 6 p.m., when the official workday ended, Richard approached her. "Still here?" he asked with false concern. "Shouldn't you be at home cooking for your husband?" "I'm not married," Jennifer replied without looking up from her work. "And even if I were, it wouldn't affect my professional ability." Of course," Richard laughed. "Just looking out for you. This kind of work can be very stressful for more sensitive people." Jennifer ignored the comment and kept working. When she was finally alone in the meeting room around 8 p.m., she allowed herself to feel all the anger and frustration she'd held back all day, but instead of letting it overwhelm her, she channeled those emotions into her work. Through the night, as she carefully soldered new components onto the motherboard, Jennifer reflected on her journey. She'd first taken an interest in computers at 12, when her uncle gave her his old PC. While other girls played with dolls, she spent hours taking the machine apart and putting it back together, learning how each piece worked. In college, studying computer science, she faced professors who questioned her place in the classroom and peers who saw her as an outsider. But her dedication and skill spoke for themselves, and she graduated in the top 5 of her class. Landing the job at Thompson & Associates had been a battle in itself. Richard resisted the hiring, but the former HR director, who had retired the previous year, insisted they needed someone with Jennifer's qualifications. Since then, she had been responsible for keeping the company's entire IT infrastructure running smoothly. Around 11 p.m., Margaret appeared at the meeting room door carrying a tray with coffee and sandwiches. "I thought you might be hungry," the secretary said quietly as she entered. "Margaret, thank you so much." Jennifer smiled for the first time in hours. "You didn't have to stay this late." "Actually, I've been working late a lot lately. Mr. Richard has been asking me to stay behind to oversee certain things." There was something in Margaret's tone that caught Jennifer's attention. "Oversee what kind of things?" Margaret glanced around, making sure they were alone. "Jennifer, can I trust you?" "Of course, Margaret. What's going on?" Something very strange is happening at this company. Over the past few months, Mr. Richard has been holding secret meetings, moving large sums of money, and..." She hesitated. "And what?" "He's been treating all the employees with even more arrogance than usual, especially you. He badmouths your work to clients even though he knows you're the best technician they've ever had here." Jennifer stopped working and looked straight at Margaret. "Do you have any idea why?" "I have my suspicions, but..." Margaret nervously glanced at the door. "It's not safe to talk about it here, but I want you to know you're not alone. Not everyone at this company agrees with how he treats you." Margaret left, leaving Jennifer with more questions than answers. She returned to work with renewed determination, but now certain there was much more at stake than just a technical challenge. At 2 a.m., Jennifer made a discovery that changed everything. While trying to access the hard drive to verify data integrity, she found system logs showing unauthorized access attempts in the days before the sabotage. Someone had tried using stolen passwords to access specific files, and when that failed, they resorted to physical sabotage. The log showed the intrusion attempts came from an internal company computer, logged in as Andrew Clark. Jennifer's heart raced. Andrew was Richard's right-hand man, always present at important meetings, always willing to do whatever the boss asked. If he was involved in the sabotage, it meant Richard not only knew about the problem, but had orchestrated it. But why? What reason would Richard have to sabotage his own equipment and then challenge her to fix it? The answer came when Jennifer managed to partially recover some files from the hard drive. The computer didn't just contain data from the contract Richard had mentioned. There were also detailed financial records of suspicious transactions, transfers to personal accounts, and documents suggesting embezzlement from the company. Richard didn't want the computer fixed. He wanted her to fail publicly, to justify hiring his brother-in-law's firm, which would likely charge a fortune to try repairing the equipment, fail on purpose, and ensure the incriminating files were never recovered. It was a clever and cruel plan. Richard would kill two birds with one stone, get rid of the evidence against him and publicly humiliate Jennifer, using her failure as justification to never hire women for technical positions again. Jennifer spent the rest of the night working with renewed urgency. She wouldn't just fix the computer, she'd make sure all the data was preserved. Richard wasn't going to get away with this. In the morning, as the second day of the challenge began, Jennifer had already managed to repair the physical damage to the components. The equipment was working, but she still needed to fully recover the data and test all the systems. More importantly, she had to decide what to do with the evidence she had found. Richard arrived at the office at 9 a.m., accompanied by the same executives as the day before. He looked confident and relaxed, like someone who already knew the outcome of a game before it even ended. "So, Jennifer, how's it coming along?" he asked with a fake smile. "It's progressing well," she replied, keeping her tone professional. "I should finish on time." Richard's confident expression faltered slightly. "Are you sure? Because it would be completely understandable if you wanted to quit now. It wouldn't reflect poorly on you. Everyone would understand that this is a job for more experienced professionals." "I'm sure I'll be able to finish," Jennifer insisted. Throughout the morning, Richard made excuses to interrupt Jennifer's work. At one point, he brought in clients to show how technical maintenance worked, and at another, he asked her to explain every step of the process, claiming educational interest. In reality, Jennifer realized he was trying to delay her and increase the psychological pressure. Every interruption was an attempt to make her make mistakes or give up on the challenge. At 11 a.m., Richard brought in 3 technicians from an outside company to supervise Jennifer's work. "Everyone, I want you to watch closely what she's doing," Richard said, "to make sure there are no irregularities in the process." The 3 men positioned themselves around the table where Jennifer was working, scrutinizing her every move with critical looks. It was a clear attempt at intimidation. "Miss," said one of them, a middle-aged man with a grey mustache, "are you sure you're following the correct procedure? Because from what I'm seeing here, your approach is all wrong." Jennifer stopped what she was doing and looked at him. "In what way is my approach wrong?" "Well, first, you should have tested the power supply before touching the motherboard. And second, that soldering job you did has too much tin. It's going to cause a short circuit." Jennifer smiled inwardly. The man was clearly trying to discredit her with incorrect information. "Actually," she replied calmly, "I tested the power supply before starting any repairs. It's working perfectly. And as for the soldering, what you're calling excess is actually a specific technique for this type of repair, ensuring better conductivity and durability." "She's right," said Margaret, who had just entered the room. "I saw her test the power supply last night. And as for the soldering, my neighbor's son is in trade school and uses the same technique." The 3 technicians exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable at being challenged by 2 women who knew what they were talking about. "Anyway," said another technician, "if I were doing this job, I would have finished a long time ago." "Then why couldn't you fix it when Mr. Richard called you last week?" Jennifer asked, putting them on the spot. An awkward silence followed. Richard quickly intervened. "All right, everyone, thanks for the supervision. You can get back to your tasks." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, Don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers out. Now back to the story. After lunch, Jennifer was in the final stages of the repair. The components had been replaced, the systems were functioning, and she began the data recovery process. It was at this moment that Richard showed his most desperate side. "Jennifer," he approached her, "I need to talk to you in private." They left the meeting room and went into the hallway. "Listen, maybe I was a bit harsh with you yesterday," Richard began, trying to sound conciliatory. "How about we end this challenge now? I'll pay you $50,000. You say you couldn't fix it and we call it even. Everyone wins." Jennifer looked him straight in the eye. "Why do you want me to quit when I'm so close to finishing?" "It's just... well, this contract is very important for the company. If something goes wrong with the data, we could lose millions. Maybe it's better left in the hands of more experienced professionals." "Mr. Thompson, with all due respect, I am an experienced professional, and I will finish the job as agreed." Richard realized she wouldn't budge and tried a different approach. "Jennifer, you don't understand. There are things on this computer that could be misinterpreted. Documents that, without the right context, might cause unnecessary problems for the company." Now Jennifer was certain. Richard was afraid she'd find something incriminating. "What kind of documents?" she asked innocently. "Nothing you need to worry about. Just complex accounting matters that might confuse someone unfamiliar with the business." "I see. Well, since I'm just a technician, I'll stick to recovering the data and making sure everything works. You don't need to worry about any interpretations from me." Richard didn't seem reassured, but had no way to stop her without revealing his true intentions. Back in the meeting room, Jennifer kept working with renewed determination. She knew she was being watched, not just by Richard but by other employees who had grown curious about the challenge. At 4 p.m., Andrew Clark nervously approached her. "Jennifer, can I talk to you for a moment?" They moved to a quieter corner of the room. "I need to tell you something," Andrew began, visibly distressed. "About the computer, about what happened to it." Jennifer feigned surprise. "What do you mean?" I was the one who damaged the equipment. Mr. Thompson made me do it." "Made you how?" "He said if I didn't, I'd lose my job. And I can't lose this job, Jennifer. I have 3 young kids and my wife is unemployed. I need this." Jennifer felt a mix of anger and pity for Andrew. He was just another victim of Richard's manipulations. "Why did he want you to sabotage the computer?" "I don't know exactly. He just said it was for the good of the company, that there was a better way to solve the problem, but he needed to prove first that traditional attempts wouldn't work." "What kind of traditional attempts?" "Hiring in-house techs, especially women." Andrew hung his head, ashamed. "He said after your failure, no one would question outsourcing the whole IT department." Now it all made sense. Richard wasn't just trying to humiliate her personally. He wanted to use her failure as justification to fire the entire in-house IT team and outsource the work to his brother-in-law's company, likely pocketing a commission in the process. "Andrew, did you make copies of the files before damaging the equipment?" "No." Mr. Thompson was very clear. "I was only to damage the physical components, not touch the data." He said the files had to stay intact to avoid raising suspicions. That confirmed Jennifer's suspicions. Richard wanted the data recovered by his brother-in-law's firm, which would charge a fortune, but the incriminating files would mysteriously disappear in the process. "Thank you for telling me, Andrew. That must have been very hard for you. You won't report me? I'll think about what to do. But I want you to know I understand your situation." By 6 p.m. on the second day, Jennifer was practically finished. The computer was working perfectly, and nearly all the data had been recovered. All that remained was a final systems check and creating security backups. Richard walked into the room accompanied by 2 men Jennifer didn't recognize. "Jennifer, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Carter and Dr. Myers. They're financial systems specialists here to conduct an independent evaluation of your work." The 2 men greeted Jennifer politely, but she sensed something odd about the situation. Why would Richard feel the need to bring in outside evaluators if the challenge was simply to fix the computer? Miss Jennifer, Dr. Carter said, we understand you've been working to recover specific data from this equipment. We'd like to oversee this final stage to ensure nothing is accidentally lost. Of course, Jennifer replied. I'm just finishing the recovery process. All the files appear intact. All the files? Dr. Myers leaned in. Are you certain you recovered everything? Yes, sir. The hard drive was damaged in specific sectors, but I managed to recover nearly 100% of the data. Jennifer noticed Richard paled slightly at this. And, did you have access to all this data during the recovery process? Dr. Carter asked. As a technician, my focus was solely on ensuring the files could be accessed again. I don't analyze client document contents. Richard seemed slightly relieved, but the two doctors kept asking specific questions about what kinds of files she had encountered and whether she'd noticed any irregularities in the data. Jennifer began to suspect these men weren't independent evaluators, but rather people sent by Richard to assess whether she had uncovered anything incriminating. By 8 p.m., Jennifer had finally completed the entire job. The computer was functioning perfectly, all data had been recovered and organized, and she had created multiple security backups. I'm finished, she announced to Richard, who was nervously conversing with the two supposed specialists. What do you mean, finished? Richard quickly approached. The equipment is working perfectly. All systems have been tested and approved. The data has been recovered and is accessible. Richard stared at the powered-on computer, its systems running smoothly, and his expression turned to genuine shock. That's impossible. The technicians I brought in said the damage was irreversible. With all due respect, Mr. Richard, the technicians were wrong. The equipment had serious issues, but they weren't irreversible. With the right tools and expertise, everything could be repaired. Other company executives began crowding into the meeting room, drawn by the news that Jennifer had succeeded. Some seemed genuinely impressed, others visibly uncomfortable. Well, said Michael Robertson, one of the senior directors, it seems we underestimated Jennifer's competence. Congratulations on the excellent work. Thank you, Mr. Michael, Jennifer smiled. Richard still seemed in a state of shock. But how did you manage it? The components were completely destroyed. They were damaged, yes, but not beyond repair. It was delicate work, required precision soldering and replacing some parts, but nothing an experienced technician couldn't handle. And the data? Was everything recovered? Jennifer hesitated for a moment. She had indeed recovered all the data, including the incriminating documents, but she still hadn't decided what to do with that information. Yes, Mr. Richard. All the data has been recovered and is intact. Richard swallowed hard. Excellent, he forced a smile. So, how about we quickly check if everything is really working before we wrap up the challenge? Of course, Jennifer agreed. What kind of check would you like to do? Well, I'd like to access some specific files to confirm they're all functioning. Richard moved closer to the computer and began navigating through the directories. Jennifer watched carefully, noticing how he avoided certain folders and specifically searched for others. Mr. Richard, she said casually, if you're looking for the files from the contract with Harrison Clark, they're in the Contracts 2024 folder, subfolder September. Richard froze. How do you know about that contract? During the recovery process, I organized all the files by category and date for easier access. It's standard procedure. And you read the contents of the files? As I mentioned earlier, my focus was only on the technical recovery. I don't analyze clients' documents. But Richard noticed something in Jennifer's tone that made him even more nervous. Jennifer, he stepped closer to her, could you please give me a few minutes to verify everything is in order before we call this complete? Of course, I'll just organize my tools. As Jennifer arranged her bag, she discreetly watched Richard at the computer. He quickly accessed several folders, clearly searching for something specific. When he found what he was looking for, his expression changed completely. He turned pale and began visibly sweating. Jennifer knew exactly what he had found, the financial records proving the company's embezzlement. "Is everything in order, Mr. Richard?" she asked innocently. Yes, everything's perfect," he lied, clearly shaken. "So can I consider the challenge completed?" Richard glanced around the room. All the executives and employees were watching, waiting for his response. He couldn't deny that Jennifer had fixed the computer, but he also knew she now had access to information that could ruin him. "Jennifer," he said quietly, "can we speak privately one more time?" "Of course." They left the meeting room and went to Richard's private office. "Jennifer, you've done an excellent job," he began, trying to sound calm. "Truly impressive. Now, about the payment, how about we increase the amount? Let's say $200,000. $200,000, but we agreed on 100. Yes, but considering the complexity of the work and the exceptional quality of the result, I think it's fair to raise the reward." Jennifer studied him carefully. "And what would I need to do to receive that 200,000? "Nothing much. Well, maybe it'd be best if you formatted the hard drive before returning the computer, to ensure there are no conflicts with the new systems we'll be installing." "Format the hard drive? But that would erase all the data I just recovered." "Yes, but, well, we actually found that many of those files were obsolete anyway. We don't need them anymore." Jennifer pretended to consider the offer. "Mr. Richard, may I ask you a question?" "Of course. Why are you so concerned about these files? If they're just company documents, what's the harm in keeping them?" Richard began sweating even more. "It's not concern, Jennifer, it's just efficiency. No need to keep unnecessary data taking up space." "I see. But didn't you say yesterday these files were essential for the biggest contract in the company's history?" Richard realized he'd contradicted himself. "Yes, well, and the situation has changed. We found an alternative for that contract." Jennifer knew he was lying, but decided not to confront him directly yet. "Mr. Richard, I'd like to stick to the original agreement. $100,000 for fixing the computer and recovering the data, exactly as we agreed. But Jennifer, $200,000 is a much better offer. I prefer to keep my word. We made a deal. I held up my end, and now I expect you to hold up yours." Richard realized she wouldn't accept the alternative offer and tried a different approach. "All right, Jennifer, 100,000 as agreed, but could you at least make a copy of the data on a separate drive before returning the computer for backup purposes?" "I've already made several backups, Mr. Richard. It's standard procedure." "Ah, excellent. And where did you store those backups?" "In a secure location, obviously. Why do you ask?" Richard realized he was being too obvious about his intentions and tried to backtrack. "Just professional curiosity." "Well, let's head back to the room and finalize this officially." Back in the meeting room, Richard announced that Jennifer had won the challenge and deserved the agreed payment. There was some applause from the employees present, especially from Margaret, who smiled proudly. "Jennifer Miller," Richard said formally, "in recognition of your outstanding technical work, Thompson & Associates is pleased to pay you the sum of $100,000 as agreed." "Thank you, Mr. Richard," Jennifer replied. "It was an interesting challenge." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing, Richard prepared a check for the promised amount, but Jennifer noticed his hands trembled slightly as he wrote. "Now," Richard said, "if you could just hand over the computer and related equipment, we can consider this matter closed." "Of course," Jennifer agreed, "but I'd like to give a brief presentation about the work done, if possible, for educational purposes." "Presentation?" Richard seemed alarmed. "I don't think that's necessary." "Actually, I think it's an excellent idea," Michael Robertson interjected. "It would be interesting to understand what went wrong and how it was fixed." Other executives agreed, and Richard had no way to refuse without looking suspicious. Jennifer stood by the computer and began her presentation. "As you can see, the equipment is now functioning perfectly. The main issue was deliberate sabotage of the motherboard components, caused by a corrosive substance precisely applied to specific points." Murmurs of surprise filled the room. "Sabotage?" Michael asked. "Are you sure about that?" Absolutely. The damage wasn't from natural wear or an accident. Someone with technical knowledge deliberately used chemicals to cause these specific defects. Richard was visibly uncomfortable. Well, that's very interesting, but he tried to interrupt. Additionally, Jennifer continued, during the data recovery process, I discovered unauthorized attempts to access system files using illicitly obtained passwords. The room fell heavy with silence. Hacking attempts? Michael leaned forward. Where did they come from? Jennifer hesitated. She could expose Andrew right then, but she decided he was more of a victim than a culprit. The attempts came from an internal company terminal, but I believe whoever did it was pressured by outside parties. Richard was sweating profusely now. Jennifer, he said firmly, I think you're speculating too much. Let's stick to the technical facts. You're right, Mr. Richard. I'll stick to the facts. Jennifer turned back to the computer and opened a specific folder. During the recovery process, I organized all the files by category. Contract files here, administrative documents there, and... She paused dramatically. Financial records in this folder. Richard stood up abruptly. Jennifer, I think we've seen enough. We're all impressed with your technical work. Why don't we call it a day? But I haven't finished the presentation yet, Jennifer insisted. I'd like to show how I organize the financial records. There are some very interesting ones here. No, Richard shouted, completely losing his composure. I mean, it's not necessary. Those documents are confidential. Richard's outburst drew everyone's attention in the room. Michael Robertson stood up as well. Richard, why are you so nervous? If they're company documents, we should all have access. They're sensitive documents, Michael. Strategic matters that shouldn't be discussed openly. What kind of strategic matters? Michael pressed. Jennifer seized the tense moment. May I show an example? She asked, directing the question at Michael, not Richard. Please, Michael replied. Jennifer opened a specific file on the computer screen. It was a bank transfer record showing significant amounts being sent from the company's account to Richard's personal accounts. The silence in the room was deafening. What is this, Richard? Michael asked, his voice low but commanding. Richard tried to move toward the computer, but Jennifer subtly positioned herself between him and the equipment. They're salary advances, Richard stammered. Approved by the finance department. Advances of $500,000? Michael read from the screen, and here it says they were transferred to an account in your wife's name. I can explain all of this, Richard said, but his voice lacked conviction. Jennifer opened another file. And this one shows inflated contracts with companies that... She checked the details. How interesting. This IT consulting firm is owned by Richard's brother-in-law. Now there were over 10 people in the room, including employees drawn in by the commotion. Everyone watched in silence as the truth unfolded. Michael stepped closer to the screen and began reading the documents more carefully. Jennifer, could you print some of these? Of course, she replied, sending the files to the printer. Richard made one last desperate move. You don't understand, he shouted. This company was almost bankrupt. I did what was necessary to save everyone's jobs here. These personal investments were to cover temporary deficits. Personal investments? Michael picked up the pages coming out of the printer. Richard, this shows transfers of $2 million over the last 6 months. To your personal account, your wife's account, and your brother-in-law's businesses. Jennifer watched everything in silence. She had done her part, fixing the computer and recovering the data. What happened next was no longer her responsibility. And there's more, Michael continued reading. Here it says you unilaterally cancelled several legitimate contracts to redirect work to your brother-in-law's company, at rates 300% higher than the competition. Richard sank heavily into a chair, knowing there was no way to deny the evidence anymore. Jennifer, Michael turned to her, did you know about all this when you took on the challenge? No, Mr. Robertson. I discovered everything during the data recovery process. My role was technical, not investigative. But you could have kept this information confidential. I could have, Jennifer agreed. But when I was specifically asked about the file organization, I felt it was my professional duty to be transparent. Margaret approached Jennifer and whispered, You did the right thing. Richard raised his head and looked directly at Jennifer. You planned all this from the start, didn't you? Mr. Richard, I simply accepted your challenge to fix a computer and recover data. If you had nothing to hide, there wouldn't have been a problem. But you knew there was compromising information in the system. How could I have known? You yourself said I was just a woman who didn't understand technology. How could someone so incompetent plan something so complex? The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Some employees even smiled discreetly. Michael took control of the situation. Richard, you're fired, effective immediately. I'll contact our lawyers to discuss the legal implications of your actions. You can't do this, Richard protested. I built this company. You nearly destroyed this company, Michael countered. Jennifer, once again, congratulations on your exceptional work. You didn't just fix the computer, you saved our company from an even bigger fraud. Jennifer smiled modestly. Thank you, Mr. Michael, it was just my job. No, it was much more than that. You showed professional integrity and exceptional technical skill. In fact, I'd like to talk to you about future opportunities here at the company. Richard was escorted out of the building by security, still protesting his innocence. The other employees began to disperse, murmuring about the dramatic events they had just witnessed. Margaret walked up to Jennifer. I always knew you were special, the secretary said, but I never imagined you'd save the entire company. Actually, Margaret, you helped a lot. If it weren't for your subtle hints about Richard's strange behavior, I might not have noticed the right details. I just did what was right, just like you. Michael approached Jennifer again. Jennifer, now that this situation has been resolved, I'd like to make you a formal offer. What kind of offer? With Richard gone, we need someone to oversee not just the IT department, but also implement new control and auditing systems to prevent something like this from happening again. Would you be interested in the position of Director of Technology and Systems? Jennifer's heart raced. It was an opportunity she had never imagined possible. Mr. Michael, it's a very generous offer, but generous. May I ask how much freedom I'd have to implement changes? Complete. You'd have your own budget, the authority to hire your team, and full control to modernize all our systems. Given what just happened, I believe everyone in the company would agree you've earned our complete trust. Jennifer glanced around the room. She saw respect and admiration in the faces of her co-workers. People who had once seen her as just the tech now regarded her as the person who had saved their jobs and the company. I accept, she said firmly. Spontaneous applause filled the room. Margaret had tears in her eyes. There's one thing I'd like to implement right away, Jennifer said. Name it. A technology training program for all employees, regardless of gender or age. I want everyone here to feel empowered to understand and use the tools that will make our work more efficient. Excellent idea. You have full authority on that. And I'd also like to review our hiring policies. I want to ensure competence is the only thing that matters, no biases or favoritism. Approved. In fact, your first task will be finding replacements for the fraudulent contracts Richard set up. We need honest, capable partners. Jennifer smiled. It was ironic to think that the challenge Richard had created to humiliate her had become the opportunity of her life. In the following months, Jennifer completely transformed the technology department at Thompson & Associates. She hired a diverse and talented team, implemented state-of-the-art security systems, and established protocols that made it nearly impossible to repeat Richard's fraud. Andrew Clark, after confessing his role in the sabotage, was forgiven by Jennifer and Michael. Instead of firing him, Jennifer placed him in an advanced training program, and he became one of the most dedicated technicians on the new team. Margaret was promoted to senior administrative assistant, with expanded responsibilities that included overseeing the new transparency protocols Jennifer had implemented. Richard faced both internal and external investigations. He was forced to return all the embezzled money and faced legal consequences for his actions. His brother-in-law's company lost all its contracts after the fraud was uncovered. The most surprising change, however, was the cultural transformation of the firm. With Jennifer at the helm, an environment was established where competence and integrity were truly valued above all else. Productivity increased, employee satisfaction improved dramatically, and the company began attracting top talent in the industry. A year after the infamous challenge, Jennifer was in her new office, a spacious executive suite overlooking the financial district of New York City. Margaret walked in carrying a tray with coffee. "Jennifer, that report you requested just came in." "What report?" "The one about Richard's brother-in-law's tech company. It seems they shut down last week." Jennifer picked up the document and skimmed through it. "Interesting. As soon as they lost those inflated contracts, they couldn't stay competitive with fair pricing." "And guess what?" Margaret smiled. 3 former employees from there came looking for jobs here. They said they want to work for a reputable company with competent leadership. Let's review their resumes. If they're qualified, they're welcome here." Jennifer leaned back in her chair and gazed out the window. It was hard to believe how much her life had changed in such a short time. From an underestimated and humiliated technician, she had become a respected and admired executive. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from the company's HR department. "Jennifer, we received 47 resumes this week from people who specifically want to work under your leadership. The company's reputation in the market has never been more positive." Jennifer smiled. Richard had tried to use his prejudice to destroy her professionally, but he had ended up creating the situation that allowed her to showcase her full potential. That afternoon, Jennifer received an unexpected visitor. Michael Robertson entered her office accompanied by an elegant older woman she didn't recognize. "Jennifer, I'd like to introduce you to Mrs. Elizabeth Thompson, the company's founder." Jennifer stood quickly. Elizabeth Thompson was a legend in the business world, a woman who had built the company from scratch in the 1980s, facing far greater prejudices than Jennifer had ever experienced. "It's an honor to meet you, Mrs. Thompson," Jennifer said, extending her hand. "The honor is all mine, my dear," Elizabeth replied with a warm smile. "I've heard so much about you and your extraordinary work." "Thank you, ma'am. Truthfully, I deeply admire your career. You're an inspiration to all professional women, and you're carrying on that legacy magnificently. You know, when I founded this company, my dream was to create a place where talent was recognized regardless of gender, age, or background. Richard nearly destroyed that vision, but you restored it brilliantly. I just did my job, Mrs. Thompson." "No, my dear. You did so much more than that. You've proven that competence and integrity always overcome prejudice, even when the odds seem stacked against us." Elizabeth sat in the chair across from Jennifer's desk. "Actually, I came here to make you an offer." "What kind of offer?" "I'm expanding my business to other cities, Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia. I'd like you to consider taking on the role of National Technology Coordinator for all these offices." Jennifer fell silent for a moment, processing the magnitude of the proposal. "Mrs. Thompson, it's an incredible opportunity, but I've just begun implementing changes here. I wouldn't want to abandon the project halfway. And you won't. The idea is for you to use New York City as a model and replicate that success in the other branches. You'd have full autonomy to hire teams, establish protocols, and shape the organizational culture as you see fit. Can I think about it?" "Of course, but I want you to know I have complete faith in your judgment and abilities. You turned a crisis into a growth opportunity. That's genuine leadership." After Elizabeth left, Jennifer sat alone in her office, reflecting on how much her life had changed. A year ago, she was an undervalued technician facing daily humiliation. Now, she was a respected executive being offered a national leadership role. Margaret walked in. "Jennifer, how was the meeting with Mrs. Thompson?" "Surreal," Jennifer smiled. "She offered me the National Technology Coordinator position." "Wow, are you going to accept?" "I'm still thinking. It's an incredible opportunity, but it also means much more responsibility. Can I give my opinion?" "Of course, Margaret. You've already proven you can handle any challenge, and more importantly, you can be the change other women need to see, to believe in themselves." Jennifer looked at Margaret and smiled. "You know, you're right. When Richard challenged me that day, he had no idea he was giving me the chance to change not just my life, but potentially the lives of so many others." "And you know what's most ironic?" Margaret laughed. "He wanted to prove women lacked technical competence, but he ended up proving the exact opposite. And not just that. He wanted to humiliate me publicly, but he created the perfect situation for me to show my integrity and skill. That evening, Jennifer decided to visit her parents, who lived in a modest home on the south side of New York City. She wanted to share the news and ask for their advice about Elizabeth's offer. Her father, Anthony Miller, was a retired mechanic. Her mother, Rose Miller, had worked as a seamstress her entire life. Both had always supported Jennifer's education, even if they didn't fully understand her passion for computers. "Dad, Mum, I have big news," Jennifer said as they sat down for dinner. "Tell us, sweetheart," Rose smiled. "You look radiant today." Jennifer recounted the whole story: Richard's humiliating challenge, uncovering the sabotage and fraud, her promotion to director, and now the national coordinator offer. Anthony was quiet for a long moment, taking it all in. "Jennifer," he finally said, "you know I've always been proud of you. But today, I'm prouder than I ever thought possible." "Why, Dad?" "Because you didn't just overcome prejudice. You turned it into an opportunity to do good. That Richard tried to bring you down, but you used it to help the whole company and all its employees." Rose took her daughter's hand. "And about this new offer, dear, do you want my honest opinion?" "Of course, Mom. Take it. You have the talent, the experience, and most of all, the right heart. Women all across the country need to see that it is possible to reach where you've gotten. But it's such a huge responsibility, Mom. And you've already proven you can handle big responsibilities. Besides, remember when you were little and wanted to fix all the broken appliances in the house?" Jennifer laughed. "I remember. You always said I had the golden touch with electronics." "Exactly. Now you can use that golden touch to fix entire companies and create opportunities for others. It's the same talent, just on a larger scale." On the way home, Jennifer reflected on her parents' words. They were right. Mrs. Elizabeth's offer was, in many ways, a natural extension of what she was already doing, using technical skills to create fairer and more efficient workplaces. The next morning, Jennifer arrived at the office with her decision made. She called Mrs. Elizabeth. "Mrs. Elizabeth, I accept your offer." "Excellent, I knew you'd make the right choice. When can we start discussing the details?" "Whenever you'd like. But I have a few conditions." "Go ahead." "I want to keep my base in New York City and travel to other cities as needed. I don't want to abandon the project I started here completely." "Perfect. And the second condition?" "I want full autonomy to implement training and inclusion programs in all branches, not just for women but for anyone facing prejudice or barriers in the workplace." "Approved. Anything else?" "One last thing. I'd like Margaret Wilson to be promoted to my National Executive Assistant. She has experience, integrity, and understands the culture we want to create." "The secretary who worked with you during the Richard situation?" "Exactly. She was key in identifying the problems and deserves recognition." "Consider it done." "Jennifer, I'm more and more convinced I made the right choice." In the following months, Jennifer traveled across the country, implementing systems and training programs in the company's branches. In each city, she faced different challenges but always with the same approach: technical competence paired with personal integrity. In Chicago, she found a branch run by executives who underestimated the competence of female employees. Jennifer implemented a blind evaluation system, where projects were judged without reviewers knowing who created them. The result was a dramatic improvement in work quality and well-deserved promotions for women who had previously been overlooked. In Boston, she discovered the branch was losing young talent because older managers resisted technological changes. Jennifer created a reverse mentorship program where younger employees taught new technologies to the more experienced, while the latter shared their business expertise. The result was a synergy that boosted the entire team's productivity. In Philadelphia, she faced the challenge of a branch that was nearly shutting down due to poor management. Jennifer spent 2 weeks analyzing every process and found the problem wasn't a lack of employee competence, but outdated systems and insufficient training. After implementing modernizations and training, the branch became the company's most profitable in 6 months. Each success reinforced Jennifer's confidence in her skills and her mission. She wasn't just fixing computers or systems, she was transforming lives and proving that competence and integrity could overcome any prejudice. End of story. Now tell me what you thought of Jennifer Miller's story and where you're watching from. Do you believe competence always wins over prejudice, as it did for our protagonist? Leave your honest opinion in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective on this story of perseverance and transformation. Thank you so much for your company, and don't forget to leave your like, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other heartwarming stories like this one.